Welcome back to Inside Update, where every other week we catch up about headlines across Connecticut. This show is brought to you by InsideInvestigator.org. We are a nonprofit newsroom focused on rooting out corruption in Connecticut through investigative journalism. Today, Marc Fitch is back with us, and also someone you haven't seen in a while. Welcome back to Inside Update, Tricia Ennis. How's it going?
Hello. I'm doing well. How are you?
Fantastic. Um, so Trisha, we brought her back because she is here to talk about her newest oddities piece about kindness. And Marc is also going to share more about the financial impact of ending the Trump tax cuts. So, Trisha, we're going to start with you. Let's talk about kindness in Connecticut. This was a really cool oddities piece. Um, Jump in. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so I think folks in more of like the southern part of the state might be more familiar with the person that I profiled here, Ken Engelman. He is a Branford resident who has been very active in the community for a long time. He considers himself what he called a serial volunteer. He found out that he actually really enjoys volunteering with community projects some years ago and has worked on things like the wolf stock that they have down there and a few other events. And so he found out he really likes volunteering with the community. He started like a community volunteer program that matches people who want or need to volunteer, whether for school or because they just like doing it, with programs or people or events that need volunteers. And so he sort of like snowballed all of this community like building stuff into these signs that are now all over the place, especially down in the southern part of the state. So they are, you've probably seen them if you've been driving around in sort of the lower regions. And I believe there are now some a little more north. I think some have made it up to Hartford by this point. But there are these little lawn signs that just say, please be kind on them. They are very like, they're very homemade, which I think is he really likes. He likes the idea that they are obviously made by people. They're not, mass produced. They're not being printed at, Kinko's or whatever people use to print these days. They're not being mass produced or not being shipped out and then just like flooding the state. They're very slowly growing organically because each of them is being made by a person, usually him, but there have been a lot more people who have been going to sign making parties, learning how to make these signs, and then putting them out in their communities. So, yeah, it's just this nice little sign campaign trying to remind people to be nicer to their fellow humans.
I did see so I was driving in Hartford yesterday. I did see them in Hartford, right
Mm-hmm.
by the horse statue, right by the Capitol with the turtle on it. That's a whole nother
Mm-hmm.
topic that we can talk about at some point. But yeah, so they have made it up to Hartford. They actually, I think I saw four or five of them plopped around.
Mm-hmm.
So I know he's gotten coverage. I feel like our timing on this was kind of funny because we had the drop on this story. We were writing about it. We were excited about it. And like two or three other papers also have written about this as well
Mm-hmm.
since then. So it seems like there's not just public interest, but media interest, and people are getting the feel good vibes on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's always nice to find someone who's just doing something to be nice, right? It's not necessarily like, there's no big expose here. It's just a guy putting up signs. He doesn't really have any motivation behind it besides like if you were driving down the road and the story that he had given, not really like a story, but like the example he'd given was, you're driving down the road and someone cuts you off and you get angry about it because that's a normal human reaction, but maybe you see one of these signs and it helps you to like take a moment, pause, calm down, and like not allow yourself to just sort of, yeah, not allow yourself to fall into the trap of anger and meanness that we so often do in our fast-paced world. So yeah, there's really no other ulterior motive. He's not taking money. It's just like the only donations that have really come in were the signs, because this started during the last, not this like this past November or the previous one, where he was working like as an election volunteer and he saw all of the lawn signs that people like stick outside of actual polling places
Yep.
and was like, what's going to happen to these tomorrow? Like these are useless after today. So he called up some campaigns and was like, "Hey, do you mind donating your signs to me so I can repurpose them to something else?" And he got a huge donation of these campaign signs because like they don't need them anymore. They're just going to sit around, collect dust, or get thrown out. And so it's a combination of sort of this community project trying to inspire kindness in the world, and also it's recycling. So
Win-win.
Yeah, I've seen these signs in Litchfield County as well. And yeah, I just thought they were just random people. Like I thought it was just some random person, like, doing whatever. I didn't realize that there was a whole campaign behind it.
yeah, I mean, it's a campaign in as much as it can be when he's very relaxed about it. He's not doing a big media push for the most part. Those of us who have picked up the story, it's been very organic. Like someone's told someone about a person, and then we've just along the way connected with him and talked to him about it. I think it's becoming more of a campaign because of the word of mouth. Um, but he's not investing a lot of dollars in it. It's just sort of people are finding out about it, the community talks about it, and then it grows. He's when we were driving around, Brantford, Guilford, these places down in the southern part of the state, we came across two or three signs that he did not put out. So someone had found signs or had talked to someone about it, and a business had put a sign outside of their of outside on their lawn. So the idea here is not that he wants every homeowner to stick one outside of their house. I mean, unless they get critical mass, and that becomes like the only places that don't have these signs. But the goal is very much to find high traffic areas, talk to business owners or community leaders to put the signs outside of city halls or local businesses that are in high traffic areas, because that will make the greatest amount of impact. The largest number of people possible will see them, and ideally, it can inspire some kindness in some bigger ways. And I know that they are launching a billboard sometime this week that will run for 8 weeks down in New Haven.
It kind of reminds me like during like the height of COVID back in 2020, uh, things like this kind of popped up in different towns. I think
Mm-hmm.
can't remember. It might have been Guilford or Madison or something. One of those kind of coastal towns. People were writing messages on rocks, and there was these kind of moments during the initial COVID shutdown where you kind of saw things like this happening. It almost seems like it's maybe you know following up on what occurred during that era.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a lot of similar DNA with stuff like that. It's like messages from other people because we do live kind of in a disconnected world, and I think that ultimately the goal of projects like that or projects like this are like every once in a while you come across something that obviously has a human hand in it, and there's a little bit of connection to another person, especially if you know about the campaign. Like if you know that these signs are out there and then you see one, like it probably makes you smile. Whereas if you see one randomly and don't know anything about it, it might have less of an impact because you don't remember the story behind it or the person behind it or the people that are doing it.
There was someone who commented, this is, it's a great story, it's a great read, and someone, of course, there's always a complainer about even the happiest of messaging, but they were like, they didn't know what it was. They were in that situation. They were like, it felt aggressive because it had an exclamation point at the end. And I was like, what an
Yeah.
interesting and odd thing to complain about. Like, I feel like that kind of missed the point of the driving force here.
I think people have to get a handle on what is actually aggressive.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
totally fair. I mean, the signs, they are handmade with a stencil that he was helped out with by one of the crafty folks over at Home Depot. And it is, all caps, block letters, and there is an exclamation point at the end. So I guess if you're used to texting, all caps and an exclamation mark is a little bit aggressive. I am told that I'm going to stop using periods in my text messages because they sound mad. But I think it's just the way different people take it. But if you're seeing the red signs, maybe you don't like red, but there's purple and blue and green and all sorts of different colors based on what community you're in. So I suppose we'll take the note, but carry on with the idea.
I will never sacrifice decent grammar in my text messages. So
Yes.
Yeah.
Language is a river, right? It keeps changing. It's a funky thing in journalism too, as we try to figure out, the rules change. It's very odd. I'd like to, before we move on to the Trump tax cut thing, I want to just chat briefly about the fact that, we're a newsroom where we are tasked with rooting out corruption. And yet we do publish these really positive stories. And I want to give you both credit. I mean, we're also driving through, we took the family around it was raining, so we couldn't actually do it, but Bushnell Park, right? Where Marc, you've written about the carousel and this other, Tricia, I actually think you did some carousel related work in the past as well. But this kind of effort, and I think it's important to note that despite a really divisive media landscape, there's real value and good in pointing out, I think from day one, we said pointing out the triumphs over obstacles and the good things that are happening in our community. So we welcome those tips as well. I know we've gotten some people who've written in and said, I don't know if you want this. It's not corruption. It's more like happy-go-lucky. And I'm like, no, are you kidding me? You just made my Monday because we get to write about something that is cool. It's impactful. It's informative. And it's also not a bummer. Don't get me wrong. We're going to tackle the stuff that's dark, and we're going to do a really good job with it and make sure that those problems are getting fixed. But I was really happy that you picked this up and ran with it, Tricia. It was a great piece.
Yeah, and
I mean, I think that there's, sorry.
I was just going to say, pieces like this and a lot of the other pieces that you've done, it's just interesting. And part of, Connecticut Inside Investigator, it's like getting inside Connecticut, so, and that doesn't always mean it's bad news. It means it's good news too, or just interesting news.
Yeah, I mean, my goal with these pieces and with ones coming in the future is to either answer questions that people have about their community or teach people something about people that they might otherwise not understand or not know anything about, or to give people an idea of some of the smaller things that they can do. I've done a few of these. You mentioned the carousel. One was the Carousel Museum. And, it's just an interesting place with a lot of cool history in the state, and it's something that you can do with your kids. It's something you can do to learn something about not just like the history of a massive thing, but also some of the local connections that those have and the work that some people are doing to preserve that history. And something like this is just, we do, like you said, we do a lot of work with corruption, and I think sometimes people turn away from the news because it can get overwhelming, and you want little like bits of brevity, like little moments where you can take a breath and see that something good is also happening in a place where maybe you're feeling like everything is bad.
For sure. Yeah, we try to do the coverage of the follow-ups when things, even when they're bad, when they get good, we also want to write about
Yeah.
that as well. So that's awesome. Thank you, Tricia. I appreciate it. And it's good to have you on here too. I feel like it's
Oh yeah.
it's been a while. We got to do this well, next week. We got another Tricia piece coming out on Sunday. So everyone keep an eye out for that, and we'll we'll have you back on here.
It's a good one in my opinion. I like it a lot, the new one.
Yeah. It's wicked fun. It really is. So, all right, let's pivot. Trump tax cuts. Marc, this drew some attention over the last couple of days. I think we're at almost 600 comments on this article across platforms based on impressions, which is, I know, is a soft metric, but it's still interesting. The article's been seen by upwards of 100,000 people since it was published. Loop us in here. Tax consequences. What's going on?
Well, it just goes to show that, Trump is always going to get the clicks, which is probably how we got him in the first place. So,
Touche.
yeah. So the Tax Foundation, it's a tax-focused organization out of Washington, D.C., issued a report talking about what happens if the Trump era tax cuts expire, which they are set to do at the end of 2025. And what was kind of interesting about this is they did it by state, but also by congressional district. So you could see the different effects in different parts of Connecticut. And Connecticut, the average impact, if all of those tax cuts were to expire, would be about $3,300 in higher federal taxes across the state, and that's the average across the state. That varies from about like $2,200 to over $7,000 down in District 4, which includes Greenwich and Stamford. Connecticut's real Gold Coast. Now, Whether or not those tax cuts actually expire is an entirely different story. So, uh, President Biden at one point said he was going to let them expire, and then his administration had to walk that back. I mean, Joe sometimes goes off script a little bit, but Biden's budget would essentially maintain those tax cuts for people in like the middle working class income ranges, but jacks up the tax rate for corporations, people making over about 400 to $450,000 a year, billionaires, closes some tax loopholes that are used by the very wealthy, and in wants to take that money and use it to do increased earned income tax credit, increased child tax credit, things like that. Now, obviously, all this hinges on the next election, not necessarily for president, but also when it comes to congressional elections. So the House and Senate. Congress has been passing these continuing resolutions for what, years now? Just taking the current budget and being like, all right, we'll extend it a little bit farther because we can't actually come to an agreement on anything or get anything done. The Republicans in the House of Representatives in Congress, they are trying to make the tax cuts permanent or at least extend them. They have a very narrow majority in that House. They don't have the Senate, and obviously they don't have the White House at the moment. So it's whether or not any of this comes to fruition will depend largely on the upcoming election. I mean, in order to keep those tax cuts in place, the Republicans would have to hold the House, probably pick up the Senate, and get the presidency. Otherwise, it's just going to be a mess. Or if they lose it, Biden will probably, if they lose all that, Biden will probably get, the budget that he wants. So it's, everybody can make their choices as to what they want. But when I saw the report come through, I was like, well, this is interesting enough. At least people should know, and they can make their value judgment after that as to whether or not what Biden and the Democrats are pushing is worth it for them or not. One thing, if the Trump era tax cuts do extend, it'd cost about 3.8 trillion over the next 10 years. So that would add into the national debt, and that's at current spending levels. So, there's a lot of talk about, the country's debt. It is enormous and not going away, and we add to it every year. So, and that probably isn't going to change under either president. So, I mean, we haven't had a balanced budget since I was a child and Clinton was in office. So there's always going to be that debt going up, whether or not you think that this is the way to go, or that it'll spur more job creation, or if it's better to, raise the taxes on the wealthy and implement the changes that Biden wants to make. That's up to everybody, but at least here's some information and how it could potentially affect you.
I know, listen, I'm going to encourage people to go read the article because I know that there are some technical elements about how Connecticut legislators and officials have kind of tried to adapt in the past. And you do get into that in the article. Again, I'm not asking you to kind of re-explain everything. Go read the article. But are there any like key points or anything that you would want people to understand about way Connecticut would tackle that?
Yeah, well, this kind of really gets into the weeds, but part of the Trump tax cuts involved a cap on the state and local tax deduction. So you used to be able to deduct your state and local taxes, generally meaning property taxes. Connecticut has some of the highest property taxes in the country, and that also applies to businesses. Their equipment is taxed as property tax. So when Trump capped that at $10,000, that had a big impact on businesses. The state of Connecticut actually tried to sue to combat that. They lost. What the legislature and Governor Daniel Malloy did instead is they created this workaround that was actually, a lot of states tried to do a workaround. Connecticut was one of the few that did it in a way that actually worked for the IRS, in that small businesses, these what are known as pass-through entities, would be taxed at the corporate rate and then given a credit back so that they were taxed at the personal rate. Now, that passed, and it's a very complicated thing. I remember, because I wrote about this a number of times when it happened. It was a very complicated booking, system for business bookkeepers. And no sooner had it passed than the Democrats in the legislature went and reduced that credit. So it went from 93% to 87%, 87.5%, which infuriated the business lobby. And not only that, but then the businesses had to go back and redo their books again. It was a bit of a bookkeeping nightmare for their accountants. The Connecticut Business and Industry Association has tried to get this back up to the 93% level for a number of years. It's one of the largest revenue sources in state government, bringing in, I think it was 1.9 billion. So if that SALT cap goes away and businesses and people can start claiming their full state and local tax deduction, I don't know what that's going to do for that pass-through entity workaround. Will it still be necessary? Will it change? Who knows? They'll have to figure that out.
Well, I don't think any of the three of us are tax experts. I certainly know that I am in favor of paying an accountant to do taxes instead of looking at the 7,000 pages of IRS tax code myself. In the weeds is a good way to say it. And again, props to you. The article is fantastic, and I think really does lay it out in an understandable way. Tax professionals, we actually have several reasons to talk to tax professionals about pending investigations. So if you're a tax professional who is interested in offering some insight, please reach out. Connor, CONNER at insideinvestigator.org. The financial elements of what's going on in Connecticut. Spoiler alert, there's a lot of different elements that we could consider, and we need more folks who are able and willing to lend their voice to help explain things to the public. Like we said before, Tricia, another investigation coming up on Sunday. We got a whole nother cycle that we're ramping up right now. Some really exciting stuff in the next few weeks. I will say this, if you are not already, please subscribe to this show, leave a review. It's helpful. We've gotten a lot of great feedback about the program, and we want to see it continue to grow. I'd also encourage you, if you do like what we do, if you like investigative journalism, if you think that we provide value, consider becoming a donor. We are a nonprofit, so that's how Marc and Tricia and the rest of the team, this is how we do what we do. We rely on community support, so please consider that. Speak to your accountant perhaps about it, about a very large donation. That would be the way to go. And unless there's anything else we need to talk about, just a huge thank you for listening, for watching, for tuning in. And we will be back in 2 weeks. Until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.